You're talking about like groupies. It makes way more sense that this music would attract women as an audience than, say, Megadeth.
Hello and welcome to another episode of 1001 Album Complaints, the show where lifelong friends and lifelong musicians break down, analyze, and complain about an album from Robert Dimery's 1001 albums you must hear before you die. We're going to go deep on the liner notes, we're going to break down the songs musically, and we're going to ultimately vote on whether or not this was really a record you needed to hear before you died. Today, we're going to be, or we have been listening to for the last week, and we're going to be discussing Earth, Wind & Fire's record, That's the Way of the World. Very excited to get into that. Very excited to introduce, we have a special guest today, in fact. Going to get to that momentarily, but first I wanted to dip into the old mailbag and read what I think is going to be a little bit of a roller coaster of a mailbag, so I hope you're ready. And if you'd like to have your email of complaints and compliments read here live on the air by myself or one of my compadres, you can send an email over to 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. We read all your missives and we get excited by them, and I think this is going to stir up some shit. So here we go. This is coming from a gentleman, I'm sorry I'm going to mispronounce your name, Damir from Stockholm. So we have a listener all the way over in Sweden, guys.
Whoa.
This is big news.
He says, first off, love the podcast. Thank you for your service. I was listening to the Cosmos Factory episode. Amazing album and amazing band, by the way. And you were asking yourselves who below the age of 40 could possibly be listening to your podcast. And I just want to say that I am one of those people. 28 years old, and I did love Adam's Bayou joke. So there's that. I believe Alan and I groaned when that came up. But that should make Adam happy. I'm telling you, this is going to be a roller coaster.
That's
go
funny.
Up and down from here.
As a digression, I do feel like I was the one that questioned whether we had listeners under 40, so maybe I alienated a huge swath of our demographic
right.
here.
They're in Sweden. The Swedish have always been very hip when it comes to music. We all know that. He goes on to say, I also wanted to say that I started off by listening to all your reviews of albums that I already had listened to beforehand to see how much our musical preference Venn diagrams overlapped. And they mostly did, but I kept skipping over the Purple Rain and Velvet Underground episodes because I was convinced you guys would be raving about how amazing and revolutionary these albums were, which I could not disagree with more. They're not good albums at all. In fact, the VU one is outright horseshit. Actually, just based on the use of that particular curse word, this might actually be Alan in disguise for writing in.
Well, I wouldn't say I was from Sweden. I'd probably pick somewhere far less interesting than that.
So
that is a wild take.
I agree. I disagree. Yeah, I disagree.
But,
VU
there were
is
people
amazing.
on the show that week that felt strongly aligned.
Yeah,
it was an early episode, and it was a very, very contentious episode. So about half the podcast is excited that the Swedes agree with them, but I'm not on that side. And then he closes out, most controversial section coming up, boys. He closes out and says, so when I finally bit the bullet and listened to those episodes, I was so happy to hear that you guys mostly sided with me in my opinion. So keep up the good work, but also know, and I know that I'm shooting myself in the foot by ending with this statement, that your opinions on 461 Ocean Boulevard are wrong.
What?
Dude. Damn, that was like the ultimate
This is impossible.
sucker punch at the end there.
This is impossible. This is Tom. He's trolling us.
That's this guy hit all the notes of successfully trolling us, I think, by the way. So yeah, it might be Tom, actually.
I wouldn't say that was a roller coaster. That was more like a car wreck. I was like, yeah, everything checks out until, wait, what? That album sucks.
Well, if this guy is a real person, and I'm ever in Stockholm,
Let's not hang out.
Dude, he's 28, man. He's not trying to hang out with.
Yeah.
He's not trying to hang out with you.
Hey, I got a 30-year-old cousin in Stockholm. I'm gonna get him checked out. We'll find out.
Exactly.
Who he is.
Good. Good job.
Bet.
That was exciting. That was exciting mailbag, though.
That was great.
I know it was long-winded, but it had a lot of twists and turns.
I agree. It's good.
So please write more stuff like that. We're gonna stick to one mailbag entry today because that one was so long and fun, and it's gonna be tough to top. But if you want to shoot us over an email, we read all of them, and then I read them, and the other guys listen to them. So there's that. But on to today's business. We are listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire's record, That's the Way of the World. It came out in 1975, and just to give us a little taste of where we've been at all week, I'm going to play a little snippet of the song, the hit from the album called Shining. Send it around the room, have everyone introduce themselves with a short tweet-length review of the album. Tell us about how your week has gone. I'm going to kick it first to Phil.
Hey guys, it's Phil this week, hanging out. Glad to be back. I haven't been here in a couple of weeks. When Cosmo's Factory came up on the mailbag, it actually made me think back. I was supposed to be on Cosmo's Factory, and I was prepared to pan it, but I had some existential crisis around that and Bjork, and it was I had to. Yeah, I'm glad that's passed. Anyway, yeah, I had a great week. The record's great. It's fabulous. And I think Boston Globe's Stephen Kerwood said it best when he said, these guys are great. And this is a sound you shouldn't miss.
All right.
Nice. All right, we're going to kick it over to Alan next. Give us your tweet-length review of That's the Way of the World.
So my tweet-length review, this is Alan, by the way. Regardless of whether you like this album, whether you hate this album, whether you think it's good, you think it's bad, if grooves like this don't move your head or your body in some way while you're listening to this, you may want to seek some professional help. With that said, does that make it a great album? We shall see.
We certainly shall. And I'm going to kick it now to our very special guest. Justin is back with us. It's been several episodes, but he joined us for an early episode on Count Basie, lent his amazing library of musical knowledge to us, and now Justin is back. Justin, say hello.
Hey, everybody. This is Justin, a.k.a. Justafarian on Twitter, and you can find me listening to these beautiful Earth, Wind, and Fire tunes. I'm so in love with this sound. I think this album is a beautiful and emotional journey through American music, and it is not to be missed.
Nice. Well, this is Rob here, and I'll just close out this round with my tweet-length review. Earth, Wind, and Fire are tight and smooth and hardworking and fashionable and somehow also prog. That was surprising to me.
Very surprising.
Let's get into a little background on this group because I learned a lot this week, and I'm excited to dice it up with y'all before we get into the specific songs. So you can't really talk about Earth, Wind, and Fire without first talking about Maurice White. He is the creator of the group. He is the leader of the group. He's been the through line of the group, or at least was for many years, and he compiled the group, right? He started out as a session drummer at Chess Records in Chicago and was having a pretty successful career. This would have been in the 60s. He played on Muddy Waters records. He played on some Etta James records, some other hit records. And at some point, he was basically trained as a jazz drummer, but he was playing on some of those Chess recordings. And at some point, he joins jazz pianist Ramsey Lewis's band as the drummer in the Ramsey Lewis Trio, which was a very successful jazz trio. In fact, I'd love to hear Justin's take on that. I'm sure he knows more about Ramsey Lewis, but he had a successful gig as a sideman for some amount of time. But at some point decided to quit because he wanted more. Justin, what do you know about Ramsey Lewis?
Ramsey Lewis is a jazz pianist in the mold of Earl Father Hines and Earl Garner. Sort of came up, he's about the same generation as Ahmad Jamal, came up in those areas, but really didn't make the same changes or change the music in the same way Ahmad Jamal did. Kind of stayed in his pocket, but was very successful in his pocket. And he was a guy out of Chicago. He just died actually like last year, I think. He was in his 80s, and he had been in Chicago, stayed in Chicago his whole life. Very much a Chicago guy. Really stayed true to the traditional jazz format, and was making a lot of money. I don't think people realize how much money Ramsey Lewis was one of the top, earning jazz musicians in the 60s. wasn't taking a lot of chances, but was playing a lot of gigs, making a lot of money. And so he was playing in the Chicago record label Chess Records. And in 1966, he lost a couple of his drummer and his bassist. And Maurice White was doing some session work for Chess. The whole genesis of this album is in Chess Records, right? So he was doing some sessions work, and he joined Ramsey Lewis for his trio. And they made some really funky records. There's a couple good ones. I think my favorite Ramsey records with Maurice White as drums are going to be the Maiden Voyage record and the Another Voyage record. If you listen to the Maiden Voyage record, there's a couple really strong drum beats that end up getting sampled in some hip hop records. One of them, particular, in a Far Side record. And then Another Voyage is actually a really good just in and of itself. So if you do have some time, check out Ramsey Lewis. Those records are really good. And then a man who does later become, work as an arranger producer on That's the Way of the World, named Charles Stepney, the Step God. He also produces for Ramsey Lewis. He produced an album called Mother Nature's Son. So sort of the whole genesis around what Earth, Wind and Fire, and this album begins in Chess Records.
So a couple things there, right? Thank you for that context. So yeah, Maurice White really cut his teeth working as a session man for Chess Records. He's a drummer. He learns a lot from a lot of different people because he's doing these different sessions. And then he, even as a young guy, I think he was probably only 19 or 20 when he was playing in the Ramsey Lewis trio, or pretty young in any case. And and as Justin said, it was very successful, partly because Ramsey Lewis wasn't known as someone who was taking chances in jazz. Thus, he was more of a crossover hit. He was making money. He was crossing over into the pop charts, and it was a good gig. It was considered a very good gig in the music business. But Maurice White wanted more, so he quits and decides to form his own band. And one of the things is that he hears that Jim Brown, yes, that Jim Brown, Cleveland running back, Jim Brown, is interested in music and has started his own management company in LA and is interested in finding black and promoting black talent. And so he ends up hooking up, and Jim Brown is Earth, Wind and Fire's first manager.
Get out of here. That's funny. He's a prolific dude. I remember he was also if I'm not mistaken, one of the best lacrosse players of all time, or at least up until
lacrosse records, I want to say, or college lacrosse.
I mean, buy that. Yeah.
If you're built like a brick shit house running back, you're probably good at other sports. I guess that shouldn't be a surprise.
Well, it's like saying, LeBron should play for the American soccer team or something. I mean, it would probably work, right? With enough training. By the way, actually, I found one cool anecdote about his old days in Chicago, that is Maurice White's days in Chicago, is that at one point he was in a trio where Jack DeJohnette was the sax player. I just thought that was weird.
He also, Booker T from Booker T, the MGs. So Maurice was born in Memphis, and he grew up when he was younger. He went to Memphis. I think he went to Chicago when he was 14, because his mom left him in Memphis. And he was friends with Booker T from Booker T, the MGs. So him and Booker T had a little group when they was in junior high. So, he was already, grooving with these dudes. Jazz dudes,
Yeah. So he was real ensconced in that jazz world, I guess is the point of the story, and had those jazz chops, but wanted more, decided to form his own group. Earth, Wind and Fire comes from his own astrological signs that he looked at on a chart. I can't remember what the whole breakdown is.
He went to a tarot card reading in Chicago, and she said he had all the signs Earth, Wind and Fire in him. So that was
shit, that's cool.
Yeah, he's. I mean, that's what's a great thing about Maurice White. He's very spiritual, new age.
So the band is really a concept band, right? It's about creating a group for his generation. One of the things I think he was feeling when he was playing in the Ramsey Lewis trio is that he was playing to an older audience, right? Not his generation. He was playing with musicians that were older than him, and he was a young man, and he wanted something for his own generation. But number two is that he had a mission to raise people's spiritual consciousness. So this was supposed to be music with a message or with spiritual undertones. He actually had a name for it. He called it The Concept, with a capital C. And this was a through line that carried through a lot of the tougher times with Earth, Wind and Fire. he was a pretty straight edge dude and a taskmaster when it came to practicing. Like, that's one of the reasons I said they were such a hardworking band. They would practice constantly, but he was always striving for more. So he goes out to LA. He does put together a band. Jim Brown is the manager. There was another anecdote where they went to have a meeting at Jim Brown's house one time. Like, him and his brother, Verdine White, is the bass player in the band. They go over to Jim Brown's house to have a meeting. They knock on his door, and he just answers the door completely naked and then conducts the entire meeting naked.
I mean, if you got the goods, you know.
Right. And
he doesn't care. He's Jim Brown.
And I think that was where Maurice White's little brother, who was like several years, I think 10 years younger than him, was just like, oh, I've arrived in Hollywood, clearly. But anyway, so they get a contract and they do 2 records as Earth, Wind & Fire, or maybe it was more than 2 actually. But he's not satisfied. They're not having breakthrough success, and he ultimately disbands the group. So he's been like hacking away at it for a while, and he reforms and he hires a bunch of young bucks. And this is actually when he brings his younger brother in. So when it comes to this record, what you have to understand is they're like an 8-piece or a 9-piece. There's some extra musicians on the record too. But Maurice is 10 years older than everyone else. So he's like 30 and all the other guys are like 20.
Even older than his brother?
Oh, yeah. Because it's his half-brother. It's his half-brother.
Yeah, the gap between him and his brother is like 10 years.
Got it. Okay.
And actually, his other younger brother comes to play the drums. Because they fire the other drummer, and his younger brother, Fred, comes and starts playing drums before they come in this album.
So
You know,
it's
wait a second. Nobody's named Fred anymore. What happened there? Like, I know why nobody's named Jeff, but why is nobody named Fred?
But Rob, you left
Yes.
out. You left out the part where he gets signed. He leaves Warner Brothers and gets signed by the boogeyman Clive Davis to CBS Columbia.
Yeah.
And I don't know where your opinions are on Clive Davis. A lot of people don't like him because of the Whitney Houston stuff. But I heard a podcast with Santana on it. And he signed Santana to CBS Columbia, and that's where he got to do all those funky early albums. And he still has a pretty positive perception of him, and Maurice has a real positive perception of him. So it's just interesting that in certain areas he's become hated, but he was he was being pretty open back then when a lot of people wouldn't have signed somebody like Santana and let him do whatever they want. Sign Maurice White with this weird band, doing all this spiritual bullshit, and let them do what they want,
Yeah, I think that was what Maurice was looking for, right? So he had a kind of a big ask, and Clive Davis and CBS pulled off kind of a coup, getting him out of his previous record contract. And part of it was that Earth, Wind & Fire was not an easily categorizable band. A lot of people would have wanted to push them into the mold of like the Temptations, sing in harmony, kind of all dressed in suits, things like that. But they saw themselves as more of a cross between Sly Stone and maybe Weather Report. They were trying to create something truly new.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because some of the notes I had were that this definitely sounded more of the some of that soul music that had really psych rock elements, like Sly Stone, that I picked up on. I even had a note in one of the songs that, like, halfway through the song, they just turn into Weather Report all of a sudden, just playing really out there.
Shredding.
Well, hey, Maurice has a production company later, and guess who he signs to his production company? Weather Report.
Oh shit! Okay, there you have it.
No, they were definitely fans of what they were doing and fans of prog in general. And, we're just trying to mix genres quite a bit and not fall into this easily categorizable thing. And Maurice seems like he's just the kind of guy that had a vision. So even after he reformed the band with a bunch of younger guys, he continued. Then they made a slew of records after that, even before this one. That's the Way of the World is their 6th studio album. But he kept changing out players and, was looking to kind of form the right band and get to that perfect combination that he was looking for. And he was kind of relentless about it. And he was really invested in the music and the spirituality, not at all in drugs, drinking, or women, really. At least that was how he presented himself.
We're going to have to talk about that when we talk about reasons, because that's some women there.
Well, I was going to say so as it happens,
that's
I read,
always what brings you down.
So let's talk about the men, because this week I read Philip Bailey's memoir, and Philip Bailey is the other vocalist and the high falsetto on this track, and he loved the ladies. Let me assure you.
Oh yeah.
But you have Maurice White on vocals and drums and kalimba, which is that little African thumb piano. If you were wondering what that sound was on some of these recordings, pretty interesting, unique sound. You have Verdine White, who is Maurice's younger brother, on bass. Also does some vocals. This guy, Philip Bailey, on vocals and congas. You got a guy called Larry Dunn on keys. You have a couple different drummers, and Maurice himself would sometimes play drums on different tracks, but one was his other younger brother, aforementioned Fred White, a guy called Ralph Johnson. There was a horn player. There were two guitar players, Al McKay and Johnny Graham. And then you have this other personality, this producer who they hooked up with, Charles Stepney.
The God. Step God.
Yeah. So this record came out March 15th, 1975. It has been certified triple platinum. It was a huge, huge success. They toiled away as a band for 6 albums, and this was truly their breakthrough.
I think that was the most surprising thing to me in going through this album was, I mean, everyone knows Earth, Wind, and Fire, right? And if you don't know their catalog, you've heard of them. You know exactly what they are. But I was kind of surprised
it's a
that
great name.
Oh,
right?
totally.
Like just the name
totally.
alone, it's like you're instantly like, all right, like what do you got? You know,
It's a great name, and they're an iconic band. But
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised that an album like this would reach number one. You know, obviously like Motown and soul had a big imprint by that point. But there's a lot of aspects of this album. I think the psych aspects that we talked about earlier, and some of the other interesting kind of nuances where it didn't jump out at me as like, hey, this would be like really commercially viable.
Yeah, there's not a lot of what you might call singles on here. I mean, there's a lot of deep grooves. There's a lot of slow dance songs, frankly, that I understand why people would like. But in terms of a single, I feel like Shining Star is the only one that jumps out in the way that, and because I associate, and a lot of people associate Earth, Wind, and Fire with perhaps their most successful hit, September, which came later. So I was a little surprised. And then apart from the single and the kind of the slow jams, then there's just some heavy prog stuff that is not really for public consumption. Normal public, general public consumption is what I meant, right?
It reminded me a bit of when we did Maggot Brain, where there's just some really hip shit happening that I think you're right. It's not as like easy to digest for just the average Joe, I guess.
I mean, the second song on Maggot Brain is just like a straight funk ace. It's like a,
which I actually heard in a commercial recently.
Yeah, totally.
Did you guys notice that?
Yeah. It's in like a.
It's like some bank commercial. I don't know, but it's
something like that. Yeah.
It's cool.
So speaking of ways to use the music, so what happened was they did the soundtrack for what ended up being an important movie in cinema called Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, made by a guy called
Melvin Van
Peebles. Right, and it's often credited, or it's one of the films that's credited as the first blaxploitation films. It came out the same year as Shaft, but it's kind of in a similar vein. And they did the soundtrack for that, and this was before this album, and it kind of elevated them up a couple notches. And Adam's not on the call. He's kind of our resident Simpsons expert, but I wanted to point out that there is a Simpsons episode called Sweet Seymour Skinner's Badass Song, where Skinner gets fired and Flanders becomes principal. That's a reference to that movie.
The movie's also the first movie with a black director in cinema. So it was very important for a lot of reasons.
Shit, yeah, that's wild. So, unfortunately, though, that might have led them slightly astray, because then, a year or two later, another guy comes around, the guy who had made Superfly, which was also did really well at the box office, another blaxploitation film. This guy's name is Sig Shore, and he convinces them to do the music for his next movie. And, in fact, he exchanges a piece of the proceeds from the movie for a piece of the proceeds from the album. They're excited about it. This guy, Sig Shore, is talking it up big. He'd obviously just had a big success with Superfly. They head into the studio as these like well-oiled machines. They had been touring, practicing all this stuff, and they produce what they think is their best work yet. Then they go to a screening in the movie, And they literally come out of it like one of the guys is in tears. He's
Bruh,
like, that movie is
Maurice
so
was
terrible.
crying. He thought it was over. He thought that movie was going to sink the record. Verdine said, "It's going to be all right, brother. It's going to be all right." But he made a huge decision, was not to put the original motion picture soundtrack verbiage on the album. Like,
Well, what's the lineage of decisions? Because the movie was they had this screening for the movie, and apparently the director was still really confident in it. But the guys in the band saw it and were like, "This is terrible. This is going to tank our career." And it was, by the way, the movie was called "That's the Way of the World," which is why they called the album that. But based on the director's confidence before the movie had actually come out to the public, they were able to renegotiate and get the full rights to their album back, trading it. But so like they were kind of out of, even though the titles were associated, they didn't have to share the proceeds with
Maurice never wanted to have original motion picture soundtrack on the record. He's talked about that in his biography. He was 100% against that. He always wanted the album to stand on its own. And he ended up being right. Like, he was right about a lot of things. So,
well, it's funny. One of the probably the best quote that I came, or the best like soundbite that I came across for this, was on Wikipedia just for Earth, Wind and Fire when it talks about this album, and it just says, when the band saw the film, they were convinced that it would become a box office bomb, which it eventually was. It's just like stating it as just a fact.
But Rob, did you watch the video?
No, I did not watch the video. No.
It is beautiful. So there's like a 7-minute video on YouTube where you just get the introduction. But all the video is Earth, Wind, and Fire doing the title track. It's just them in the studio with all the guys and with a couple guys on the EQ, and Stephanie's in there, and it's great. At the end of the sequence, they like pack everything up in a van. You don't have to watch the whole god awful movie. I mean, Harvey Keitel's in it, but like it's cool. It's a cool just like window into them recording.
Yeah, and I did watch a lot of footage of Earth, Wind, and Fire, I should say, and in case it's not clear, they have a lot of pizzazz on stage. They were dressed to the nines. I mean, like they were from the future or had just stepped off an alien spaceship. We're talking full gold lame headbands and shit. They looked tight. But
like
head
to toe in white suits with fringe, and like, they did it up.
Almost more Sun Ra though than the Temptations. Like definitely out there, like a mixture of like Afro. It's like an Afrofuturism thing, maybe is the style.
Well,
I don't know.
Well, there's like elements of it that are almost like P-Funk, right? But they're just in this case, I think they're zeroing in on very different elements of sort of musicology, and they're more refined players, right?
I heard an anecdote too when. I think it was early in the new lineup of the band. No. Well, speaking of P-Funk, it was early in the new lineup of Earth, Wind, and Fire. Maurice and the band went and played in Philadelphia, and they opened for a band they didn't know who it was going to be, and they were kind of they were still trying to format what the music should be. It was a little more proggy. It was their dress was a little more Flower Child, flowy 60s. And then P-Funk come on and just blow the house down. And they were like, they just mentioned it as this moment of being spiritually depantsed. Like, we're not used to being blown off the stage like this. We got to get some funk into our sound.
Yeah, I can see that.
But, it was really interesting. Just going back briefly to when Maurice left Ramsey Lewis. Can you imagine being this old school jazz man from Chicago? You're into the traditional ways. Earl, I don't know if you listen to Earl Gardner, but it's very traditional jazz music. And your drummer comes up to you and he says, "Hey, Rams, I want to start my own band." And he's thinking, "Oh yeah, okay, so you're going to have a jazz trio or whatever." Nah, he's like, "I want to play jazz or pop, and I want to play samba, and I want to play all these other kinds of genres, and I want to have dancing and magic." Can you imagine? Ramsey in interviews, he said, "I thought he had sunstroke." I said, "Go home, take some Alka-Seltzer and go to sleep, right? Call me in the morning. You are going crazy, my friend."
Yeah, and that
he made it work.
That was the most surprising thing to me about this band, because I really didn't know the band coming into this week. It's just how genre in specific. They really were. How much they blended so many different styles. I was expecting them to be tight. I was expecting them to be funky. And I was expecting them to have good vocal harmony. But I got so much more than that. It's like entering a world of different styles of music. And actually, that is kind of my criticism of it, is that it is kind of all over the place at times. It was a fun listen, and there's a lot of great moments on it and several great tracks, I think. But it's a little scattered, is what I would say. And their output, they have a lot of output also. So I don't know.
I felt that same way. Yeah, like listening to this, I had an expectation of what it would sound like. And when I think of groups from this era, of this ilk, I think of like Tower of Power and Ohio Players and, some of these other like 70s soul groups. And there's just a certain, you kind of know what you're going to get. And I didn't really feel like I got that here in a very positive way.
Fair enough. So let's segue into talking about the specific songs. The first song on our focus list, we already played a little snippet of it. We're going to play a little different snippet of it. It's called It Opens the Record. And
classic, right? Right? It kicks off with that cool, like, stereo double track clavichord. It's got, like, the sort of one chord sharp 9 Hendrix jam. Awesome harmony. Like, what do you want,
The harmony is so tight. It's so tight. It's crazy.
Like the low voice. The low voice is what really makes it for me. It's just like, it doesn't jump out right away, but once you really key in on it,
it's super tight. It's super tight. They pack a lot into less than 3 minutes too.
It doesn't, it feels like much longer than like 2 minutes and 45 seconds or whatever, like much longer, right?
Absolutely. Like it's just efficient, it's just kind of in and out, a lot in there. And I think the diversity of sound too, like it's obviously a funk-ish kind of sound. Like it's kind of what I would expect of like early 70s James Brown, so it definitely is of that sort of, ilk. But I think there was also just so much more R&B and soul. It's like a nice kind of concoction of really cool sounds that were happening at that time.
Yeah, totally. And this is, my head perked up right away when I put the record on and heard this, but in particular when that electric guitar line came in around 1 minute in, and that was just like so fast and so proggy sounding. I guess it was just like a pretty straightforward pentatonic run, but I wasn't expecting it to be that. Won a Grammy for them, and it was their first top 40 crossover hit, meaning it charted both on the R&B charts and the pop charts. So this really kind of set their trajectory moving with this record. Justin, what do you think, man?
This song is at every wedding that you've ever been to. I guarantee you. Every wedding. Like, I don't care if they had a band or a DJ. This is like
it's making it into
this is like
set.
The wedding song that people it seems like is on every playlist. So I like it. It's great, right? Like it's not like, one of those songs that you're falling. It's a hit, right? Like, and it is what it is.
You've heard it a lot, and that's not the song's fault.
I guess it's not the song's fault, right? But it's also like, a little poppy for my taste. But I like it. And you know what? Look, it made money. Like, it's their first crossover hit. Like, before even people talked about crossovers. Earth, Wind & Fire is primarily being pushed on black radio until Shining Star. And then they're going on the pop charts. They're getting all these new listeners. They're primarily performing for both black and white crowds, but they're not really getting the exposure on white radio at that point. And all of a sudden, Shining Star comes around, and it just opens up a new world for them. And, it's basically all the suits at CBS are patting their belly.
This is the pocket of history specifically, like sort of like early 70s, probably like 73, 75, right up into like 82, 84, Michael Jackson, right? Where like the idea that there's like black charts and white music, right? It just seems insane because it seems so recent. And just when you see the way, those things have collapsed, right? After that point, it just seems so foreign, right?
I mean, you can go into any record store today and they got the rock pop on one side and the R&B jazz soul on the others. You know what I mean? Well, I guess we're not that far removed from it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
You know,
when you put it that way, no doubt that's true, right?
And so they worked really hard to sort of distinguish themselves. I mean, they didn't push away from the black roots and because they, there was the black universities and black radio that really got them their start, and they didn't want to distance themselves from that sound that got them those fans, but they did want to Maurice White, he always wanted to go for more and really reach everybody. He was always about this oneness of humanity. That was part of the concept, as Rob so eloquently put it. And that was, what he was going for. So I think, Shining Star is indicative of that.
So I'm surprised to hear you say it's such a wedding staple, because I honestly don't think I had heard this song before, at least not consciously. I'm sure it's entered my ear holes, but I was unaware of it. Now, but we should say that they're kind of a wedding band. I don't mean that as a diss. I mean that a lot of these songs feel like they might get played at quite a few weddings, and certainly their later hit song, September, not on this record, gets played at almost every wedding you're going to go to. So that's, I don't know if that's just a niche for them or what.
Well, it's dance music. Like
it is, but there's a lot of dance music though.
But it's funky, and I think that we talk about is crossover. Like I don't know how to define crossover, but
it's also a positive message. So it tends to be a little safer for all audiences in a way. Although I want to talk about Reasons being played at weddings later.
Yes,
is that next?
But no, we're going to get to that one. But I have one fun recording anecdote about this song. So when they laid this song down, or maybe even the first time they practiced it in the studio, they knew they had something pretty good on their hands. They kind of knew they had a hit. So they worked it pretty hard to get it to where they wanted to go. But the story goes that the musicians pretty much all left the studio. Maurice and company left the studio. They left it with, what did you call him? The step god?
Step God.
The step god was in there in the studio late night trying to finish the track, trying to mix it, and the last thing they added on the track was snare hits on 2 and 4 all throughout the song to make it more rock pop friendly.
Interesting. I wouldn't have picked up on that like distinction, honestly.
No, how could you, right? It sounds totally like it's a part of the drum beat, and yet it wasn't there. And initially, Maurice was kind of pissed about it when he came back. But then Step God, Charles Stepney, the producer, convinced him. It became a huge hit.
That's so interesting, because even obviously I just played it for myself for a second, and there's even places where the organ hits on the 4, right? So it's like they were trying to supplement for it already. Like there's a sense that they needed that backbeat. Oh, man. So I never would have sensed that listening to this.
Yeah, and even within that, you maybe sense a little of their mindset, which is to try to stay away from being a pop band. Like a little hesitancy to kind of go full pop single.
I want to give a little background on Charles Stepney, right? Because Stepney, so you guys were talking about psychedelic elements earlier, right? So Charles Stepney also was in-house producer, arranger, orchestrator, multi-instrumentalist. He played the vibraphone, piano at Chess Records. He was working with a couple of their artists, and he was working with the young lady was a secretary at Chess by the name of Minnie Riperton, and I'm sure you've heard of her. Minnie Riperton and him collaborated and created a group called Rotary Connection in the 60s, and they had some really cool psych rock that came out in the late 60s. Have you guys heard of Rotary Connection?
Yeah.
Are you fans?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Stepney is the one that's basically produced and arranged a lot of that music in Rotary Connection. So that was sort of like why you hear sort of a lot of the psych feel in some of this music is because Charles Stepney, and he did the demos for a lot. There's a this year, maybe it was the end of early this year. So he died in 1975. He died like a year later, and he collaborated on them with Earth, Wind, and Fire on one more album, Spirit, in 1976 that came out. But he died in 1976 from a heart attack. And
how old was he?
He was young. He was like 45, maybe 46.
Yeah, I feel like I'm on the clock.
But I mean, Maurice White was like, it's interesting. In Maurice's biography, he talks about going out to breakfast with Charles and watching him eat piles of bacon and piles of eggs and pancakes, and like just how much he sweated. He just sweat, like he would play, and
he got the meat
like,
sweats,
just like sweat all the time, and you knew like he was just a guy who ran hot, you know. Anyway, his family, his daughters, put out a posthumous record of demos of him on a four-track recordings called Step by Step this year, and they're really fucking amazing. And they have the genesis of some of these songs, a song called Imagination, which is on the Spirit album, but also the genesis of the song That's the Way of the World, and he's playing That's the Way of the World on a mini Moog. So it was like he was like a mini Moog, early adopter first. So it's cool to hear That's the Way of the World when he plays it on the mini Moog after hearing Earth, Wind and Fire's version, which he eventually took Maurice's inputs and the band's inputs and made into a really great song.
Well, that's a perfect segue into listening to a snippet of the title track called "That's the Way of the World." Instead, my mistake.
Oh,
dude! I was wondering if anyone picked up on that. Although I did send that around. That you could.
Why did he steal it? Why?
What an asshole!
The man has one good album, and he can't not steal shit. Like, come on.
In fairness to him, he had stole this early, right? He didn't have much, right? But
that's the only album he's got, right? He had nothing else in the chamber.
He released plenty of terrible music after that, certainly. But this was the one thing that I was hanging on to before I heard this song, That's the Way of the World. I was thinking Lenny Kravitz has that one good song. It ain't over till it's over. That's a good track. But it's pretty much cribbed directly.
It's
bro, he sings the horn lines.
Yeah,
he sings the horn line.
I didn't like line up the chord progressions to see how much of an ape it was, but within I got through like halfway through the song and there was just a vibe of this is definitely It Ain't Over Till It's Over.
Lenny Kravitz takes down a half step.
Oh, well, excuse me.
I just checked right over there.
Well, there you go. Well, that's
that means it's like the Vanilla Ice
contribution.
No, I did do.
That's fascinatingly creative. Thanks for.
Here's the thing. It's even like the sonic vibe is the same. Like the way the bass sits in the pocket and the way they got the clicks instead of the wood block instead of the snare drum, right? Like the pocket, the sonic vibe is the same.
But see, this is why the reason I don't like Kravitz is because when I looked around to hear him talking about this. And he's not even trying to hide it. He's like, no, direct inspiration. Like he's such a
I didn't realize it was
entitled,
that on the nose.
Such an entitled rich kid.
Shameless.
Yeah. So anyway, but let's talk about this song for a minute. This is a groove, dude. This is the bass is very tasty.
I actually my first note, obviously, like being a bassist. I mean, Verdine White is like he's not quite like Mount Rushmore of bassists, but I mean. If I were stacking a top 10 list of bassists, he's in that top 10. I mean, he is.
Wow.
Well, you think I'm underrating him or?
No, I've not heard him discussed in that light before. So I mean, I think he's great, but I'm not, a bassist. So
so I think he's held up as one of these 70s funk, just pocket and masters. He's not like composing in the way of like Jocko or some of these other people, Stanley Clarke, but just his pocket is so tight. But what's interesting, the reason I brought up his bass for this song was if you listen to like, everyone's obsessed with Joe Dart right now from Wolfpack, and everyone kind of sweats him for like stuff like Deantown and the real virtuoso stuff. This song though, I'm almost certain, I don't know his like influences, but he plays a lot like what's on this specific track, and it's just so tasty. The guitar solo is tasty. Everything. I think the song's a little bit long for me, but it's a great song.
I mean, I think it's one of the most perfect songs in the American music catalog. I'm really that. I mean, this. I can't listen to this song without being emotional. Like I get emotional. Just. I mean, the chord changes are like they're like hopeful, but like also contemplative.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed. They had some session players and the horn lines, but it's not like the horn lines aren't overwhelming. They're perfectly like, part of the ensemble sound. There's just so much I love about it, and the lyrics are good. I mean, it's sort of like it's a little cynical, right? Like, because the movie is That's the Way of the World. The movie was about a band that's kind of getting screwed over by the record label, and they're getting taken, and I think Earth, Wind, and Fire had some experiences like that before, so they sort of understood, and they understood that's the way of the world, and so there is some cynicism, but there's also just this beautiful hopefulness, and I think that's what I mean. Charles Stepney is the one who composed those chord changes, and it really comes through on his demo too. I mean, it's just a masterful piece of work, and I it's hard for me to find a song that I really love from this era more than this.
I really like the restraint of the song. I do feel like it maybe goes on a little too long. It becomes background music at a point. But I agree with a lot of what you both just said. And I like knowing that the players are so uber talented and yet just kind of hold it down in the pocket with this groove that just continues and feels a little like it could go on forever. So that's me almost reversing what I just said, which is it's too long, but it also just seems like one of those songs that can just loop somewhat endlessly.
Well, yeah, I know what you mean. It's like it has a really beautiful separation between like the foreground and the background, right? And it's almost like the players knew, like in the session, like how the mix was going to sound, right? And they're able to sit into those roles like intensely and powerfully.
These guys singing, I mean, we haven't really dove into the harmonies just yet, but the contrast, I think there were a lot of singers in the band, but the two main vocalists were Maurice and this guy, Philip Bailey. And so I don't know exactly who's singing what part where, but their ability to hit those really high falsettos and harmonize them and also then drop down to their more regular, I don't know, what might be a baritone voice, like that contrast is a big part of their sound that I maybe didn't know about, and I found that really pleasing. I don't feel like I've heard other singers. I can't think of a lot of other singers doing that.
When they were playing live, was Maurice playing drums? Was he roaming the stage? What was going on?
He was going all over the place.
Yeah,
all over the place, man.
Gotcha. Okay.
From a lot of the videos I saw, though, he was kind of the front man with this guy, Philip, and they were kind of like dancing around and singing together. That's what
he
at
played
least
like
from this era.
congas at some point, like switch it up.
Gotcha.
Man, they had fucking magic at that show.
Magic, yeah.
They were like, bro, their live show was wild. Like the couple years, they had fucking David Copperfield designing designing sets, and they would pop down trap doors and shit. It was wild. Like
they still play, don't they?
I mean, Maurice.
But I'm sure it's. Did he?
16. It's different. You can't even imagine the type of show. I mean, if I could go back and see any show from like the late 70s, man, that might be it for me.
Earth, Wind, and Fire, 1979, right? Probably.
77 on the Fantasy Tour. Yeah. The Fantasy Tour, I think they had. That was the because they had another magician first, and he was like the biggest magician in the world at that time. And then they got David Copperfield, and like David Copperfield's like was the biggest magician, and like they had a routine, they had all these. I mean, like they probably had one of the most intricate setups, and they said if you didn't pay attention, if you came on high, you would have gotten hurt. You could have got killed falling into some of the traps.
You imagine going to see a band and then like at the end of the song there being like a big explosion and just like all 12 members of the band just disappear right in front of your eyes. You'd be like, what the fuck?
Yeah. It's all about the spectacle, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate that. All right, let's roll it right along to the next tune called All About Love.
1975. But was this actually the first 90s R&B song?
Listen, I put this, on every record, there's got to be a low light, and I put this on as my low light. I just get, song talking is a real tough line to walk, and There were points in this where I didn't even think that Maurice was buying it, what he was throwing down. I marked a spot, I think it's at 325, where he's talking about, I studied all kinds of cults, sciences, astrology, mysticism, have mercy. He just, like, even his delivery doesn't sound like he even...
Yeah, Stevie Wonder Intervisions, when he's like, Iraq, Iran, Eurasia. Like, he's just... It reminded me a lot of that. And, like, this actually wasn't a low light for me. There's another song we're going to talk about that for me was a bit of a low light. But this was just a weird song. I don't know if you would call it the chorus, but whenever that first changes, and it happens a few times, the chord is not what you're expecting. You're like... in your psyche, I feel like there's a more major kind of chord or like a predictable chord change that should happen, or that was very like unsettling, but I thought kind of cool. But yeah, definitely a bit of an odd tune.
I like the weird shit at the end. I bought this album because it was on a bunch of lists, and I had heard some of the songs before when I first started getting into records a little over 10 years ago. And this song occurs at the end of the first side, and it's got that weird like beep, 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 beep. And I don't know whether I was just into some weird stuff or something like that, but I just kept listening. I was like, man, what are they going? What's going on there? Like, are they trying to get at something? Is this like a weird message or something like that? Like, I was like, what kind of reasoning is there to put that at the end of the? Because they at the end of the other side of the record, they also have that like little passage with that same sound, and I just like that always distracted me. I was like, what the hell is this about? Like, what were they trying to do? I don't know. I've read about the album and the band. I've never figured that out, but it's all right. Yeah, it's a jam. I mean, it's an R&B tune. It is what it is, right? Like, I think Earth, Wind and Fire, one of the things they were famous for is their ballads and their slow jams, right? And you have the origin of the slow jam. I mean, 100%. You're right. Like, all them 90s R&B guys, like, where you think they got it from? Their daddies were all listening to,
probably conceived of this music.
Seriously. Like, it wouldn't be surprising. You know? So
it is funny though. I also did feel like that part at the end was weirdly bolted on. Like, I don't know. Sometimes I can see the logic of placing like a little bit of an extra, post roll going, but yeah, it was a little strange at the end, but definitely a jam.
I'm realizing just now that did I not include any songs on this focus list that include the kalimba playing? Because that was really one of the most bright and surprising parts of this. I've never heard someone play that thumb piano with such ferocity,
gusto.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I guess it's on a couple of the faster tracks, and maybe we ended up focusing on the ballads. But what did you think about that kalimba? Just in brief, I think it's on Happy Feeling, for instance. It's on Africano. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my bad for not including one so we could talk about it, but.
Yeah, Africano is like the more like jazz track that I kind of always kind of gravitated towards. I like that. The kalimba, he was actually, he named his production company Kalimba Productions because it was a big deal for him when he was with Ramsey Lewis. He experimented with the kalimba, and apparently the story goes that he was a very shy guy. And with Ramsey Lewis, you like playing in the back drums because you were in the background, right? So there was at one point in Ramsey Lewis where he wanted to go up to the front of the mic to play the kalimba and play a kalimba solo. And like the first couple times Ramsey couldn't get him to do it. But eventually that was how he kind of broke out of his shell, was playing the kalimba solo. So that was sort of like a breakthrough for him, emotionally, in being able to, eventually like lead the band. So I mean, the sound's cool. I'm not like super into it, like whatever it does.
It feels original. I mean, I know he didn't literally invent it, obviously, but I like the idea of people. Like, is there another well-known kalimba player in the musical tradition? It's just a cool thing to be really good at and to kind of make your signature.
In this particular context, I mean, I don't. We can come back to my nonsense because I might pull us away from kalimba a little.
Okay, let's talk about. I want to talk about the song "Reasons."
Wait. Before we get into reasons, I do have a comment, a legit comment about the way the kalimba is sort of like. I like the way here in All About Love, the kalimba comes in during the sort of Gil Scott-Heron spoken word section, and
it does.
Well, yeah. Isn't that what's under there? The sort of music box sort of jam, or am I?
You know, I really didn't pick up on this instrument.
Or is that vibraphone?
It might be a vibraphone because Stephanie played vibraphone.
Oh, maybe I don't have the kalimba.
I think the vibraphone part was in that was in the song that Rob was talking about. I think the kalimba was on a couple other.
Go to Happy Feeling, Mark 45. You'll hear the kalimba.
It's kind of like, yeah, maybe I didn't pick that up as kalimba. Thank you. It's got like a gamelan vibe.
Yeah, I still don't really know what a gamelan is either. What is that?
I'm Googling these instruments as we speak.
Gamelan's more like an Eastern. I guess I would call it like.
I think it's Indonesian or something.
Yeah, it's like a rhythm quartet. It's for like these like pentatonically tuned bells and drums. It's pretty hip. And it
looks like pots and pans.
Different than this, yeah.
Oh yeah, I think it is a bunch of tuned bell chimes.
This just sounds similarly pentatonic and sort of.
This one picture literally looks like it's like a bunch of Dutch ovens with the lids on.
What's a kalimba look like?
You've definitely seen it. It's the thumb
piano. It's a little like.
Oh, this guy. Yeah, sure. I have one of these.
Maybe you should make a record with one.
As
the prominent.
Now that Maurice is gone, there's an opening. Okay, let's move on to the song.
Or alluded to the idea that this is a kind of common wedding song or like a first dance type song, when it's actually appears to be about a one night stand or something like that. So that is pretty funny. I did think in this song, it felt like a cool showcase of vocals, a cool groove. My main takeaway was that it felt like less than the sum of its parts, where like all the different constituent parts are good, but something about the song just didn't really work for me. I don't know what it was.
This falsetto kind of hurts my teeth.
Yeah,
it's
it was
like
intense.
A little too high for me. It's gonna break a glass at that wedding.
One very sustained too. Like it wasn't just like, I'm gonna reach for it like selectively. It's like no, I'm just gonna turn it up to 11 and leave it there.
It's very impressive. Don't get me wrong, but it's definitely intense.
So there's an anecdote a couple years later where the band was going through having some arguments about some women prior to going on stage, and they tried to calm them down. And I don't think it was. I think it was a manager there that said, "Guys, what are we here for? The music or the bitches?" And somebody said, "The bitches!" And everybody laughed. And everybody went, they were like, we're cool, and went back to, they played the concert, and everything went great.
They're like, hey, these aren't mutually exclusive, Like, we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
But this band is notorious, like, for, groupies, right? And Maurice White himself, like, there's stories. Maurice White is 100% upfront about his, not wanting to have, settled down a relationship. He actually invented. Have you guys heard of the term called the fly out?
No.
Where you fly a young lady out to your hotel and pay to put her up, so that you guys can hang out for the weekend. Maurice White was admits to flying out girls to his wherever he would be performing, putting them up in the hotel and having them there for him when he was, done with his shows.
Just have good conversation, things like that.
Man, yeah. I mean, the song starts out, "I'm craving your body," so I think I think they knew what was up.
Also, like, in a different way, right? They're like, you're talking about like groupies. It makes way more sense that this music would attract women as an audience than, say, Megadeth.
That's not for you, Phil. This song isn't for you, Phil.
I mean, I'm just
they
saying,
didn't
like,
make it for you.
I know. I'm just saying, like, by volume, it makes way more sense that, like, women would be at these shows. They'd be excited to be at Earth, Wind, and Fire shows, as opposed to say, make it a show.
Well, also look at this album cover. Like, these are some handsome men who are dressed extremely well. It's kind of too easy.
Yeah, I just like the idea that woman doesn't even get to go to the show. She just has to sit quietly in the hotel room waiting.
I mean, they might have gotten to go to the shows. I don't know. He just talks about in his book how he was flying girls out for whatever show he'd have and have them
Just chilling.
The one timestamp I noted, I didn't love this song either. Like I said, the falsetto is a little intense. But the one thing I wanted to point out arrangement-wise is that, and it's timestamped at 1:56, when they drop back into the verse after the first chorus, the feel of the verse has totally changed. They're hitting different rhythmic beats. They're emphasizing different
syncopation is fire. I dig that part. That's the one part like.
I just think that's a sign of someone who's working hard to arrange songs in a layered manner.
Yeah,
and I suppose you have to compare that kind of to what's going on in the first verse, but it's really different, you know.
So I've been watching some YouTube videos just by like a bunch of different Nashville guys in general, mostly guitar players, just trying to get like their take on things. And one of the guys said this phrase, "Take the heat in the second verse." Right? And it's the idea of that, like, at some point in the song, right? Usually the second verse in a pop song, right? Nothing changes except the words. So somebody's got to make it change. And in this song, like in this spot here, it's like the drums are taking the heat, right? Like they do this thing where like nobody else, they just, yeah, it's cool, it's hip, and it's a very, very professional. Yeah, it's a good call, Rob. Good detail.
No, it's a good point about song structure generally, and I think we've all kind of known that, having written songs and gone through those arrangements. But it is kind of a weird trough in the arrangement, or it could potentially be, unless you really have stuff to add or stuff to change.
Well, yeah. You write a song on a single instrument, it's one thing, and then you start playing with a group, you got to leave things out, right? So you have somewhere to go. It's just a different puzzle.
Cool. All right, let's go on to the last song on the list. It's called, and it's also the last song on the record, and it's called
See, fuck this. We want to do our like headhunters thing here.
I was thinking more Return to Forever, but yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, one of the notes I had was that I thought it limped to the finish a little bit, in that this feels very meandering, and it feels like it just is a little bit amorphous. It is cool, though, to see them flex a little bit because, I mentioned earlier, I had a certain set of expectations, and they kind of outdid those expectations. Obviously, they're great musicians, but it was cool to see them do their, sort of proggy kind of thing here. It honestly felt like a jam to me. In a good way.
Yeah, I thought the groove here was really cool. I don't love the track ordering. I don't know if they should have put this last exactly because it was a little more experimental. It feels like they could have closed it out with one of the more epic ballads. Just a thought, but I did like the groove of it, and it really perked my head up because of I didn't count out exactly what time signature some of the sections are in. They're probably in 7 or something, but it felt pretty revolutionary for a pop group at the time to be putting stuff like this down.
Yeah, this kind of like blows my ears up. Yeah, like I also like this. There are elements of this record, and this song definitely reminds me of it. Like there are some lines back to maybe what Stevie Wonder is doing around this time, just with some of like the clavinet sounds,
Totally.
and some of like the bigger arrangements, and that's like I don't mean that in like a. Artists respond to each other's work, right?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because in Philip Bailey's memoir titled Shining Star, which is the one I read, he mentioned specifically that he loved Stevie Wonder so much, and during this period where he could tell Earth, Wind & Fire was doing really well, he really went out of his way to not listen to Stevie Wonder's material as much as possible because he knew he wanted to be as distinct from it as he could. Yeah.
It's Charles Stepney and using the mini Moog and I mean it's clear Stevie Wonder. I mean parallel tracks I think is the best way to think about it, right? He's on this. I think if Stepney had lived longer, he would be a lot more, important and famous. He might have done some great things, in the late 70s, unfortunately. But he's on a similar parallel tracks. He's already using the Moog. He did an album that was like, use the Moog with Ramsey Lewis. That was basically Mother Nature's Son. That was like kind of like a redo of like the White Album or something like that. I think
I was checking out one of those records earlier in the podcast. I just looked at the track list. Maiden Voyage has Lady Madonna on it, and it has another. And it has Quinn the Eskimo. So he's definitely doing that jazz hip hop song thing,
and that's right? Stepney that produced Maiden Voyage.
Tradition. Yeah, totally.
With Maurice White on drums and Charles Ramsey Lewis on.
And the Lady Madonna's pretty out there. It's got some pretty weird sounds on it. It's pretty weird, in a cool way. What's cool, I think, about the synthesizers and the impact they had on a lot of keyboard players, it's a monophonic instrument, right? So all of a sudden, all the best keyboard players have access to these sounds that have been impossible to get to for keyboard players before. But they can only play one note at a time, right? So it's this whole mind fuck. And they can create chords, right? Because they're in studios, right? But they got to play it one note at a time. They got to think about it differently, right? They got to think about their own parts, like a horn section a little more. And I just think it has a really cool impact on the pad sounds and some of the, and you hear it here. It's not just the solo, it's some of the stuff that's happening in the background. It's very hip. And you even wonder, does it even begin to bleed into the way you think about these vocal arrangements, right? Which are similarly big, beautiful stacks.
Yeah, they talked about how when they would rehearse, they would very purposely rehearse vocals separate from everyone else in the band too, and like get really kind of solid on the arrangements separately, and then come together.
That makes perfect sense. So we definitely run quiet band practices where we'll not have drums, or drums will be very just timekeeping. And you do get it's a whole different experience, right? Where the vocals dial in and the details are very obvious.
Well, it's like when you strip a song to that point, you can really tell if it's a good song or not.
Yeah.
If you take away all the noise.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think we've talked about this record quite enough. We're at the end of our focus list, and all that remains now is to go around the horn and vote. Does Earth, Wind, and Fire's That's the Way of the World belong on the list of 1001 albums you must hear before you die? Must you hear this record before you die, Alan?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think it's essential. It fits a lot of my criteria. So really iconic group. It's their only album on the list, which to me weights things heavier, where, iconic group, one album on the list. But it just... you could make a case that it's not essential, right? I think there are other groups around this time that I do find maybe a bit more essential, going back to Sly Stone and some of these other groups. But I think it's great, it's classic, and it's worth a listen.
Awesome. Let's start with Justin.
1001 record. I think this would be 100 records that you need to listen to before. You can find this on a lot of the top 50 soul record lists. I mean, I'm a Maurice White acolyte. I'm an Earth, Wind, and Fire evangelizer. I believe in what Maurice did and what they did, and I feel like this is such a powerful effort, and it's a great tribute to the beautiful musical genius of Charles Stepney, and I hope people can just get a chance to appreciate it.
Phil, what do you think?
I think Justin took some of the words out of my mouth. I think this is probably, I'm only maybe, 50, 60 episodes in. How far in are we? We didn't hit 100 yet. Where are we?
We're close. We're 80 something, right?
Yeah. I imagine we were at 100, but we're not quite there. And it doesn't matter. I feel like this is 101, not 1001. You'd be hard-pressed to find a better 38 minutes. yeah, this is an easy yes. I'll definitely, I'll probably buy this on vinyl.
Cool. Well, I'm going to round it out and make it unanimous. I think you absolutely should listen to this. I'm certainly glad I did. I really didn't know too much of what to expect, and I was happily surprised by what was on here. And I think one of the reasons it's important, all the reasons that were mentioned, of course, but I'll just add to that it represents this pastiche of what that era was about. And I think, from one of the best groups and the best set of musicians who were striving to change music, to do a lot of different things, all in the context of one band. So you get a lot of different sounds and no doubt a lot of different inspirations coming off of this. That is obvious.
No, totally. I think something I'm looking forward to coming out of this conversation even is just learning more about some of this crew. Right? Like, it seems pretty clear that this is like a Steely Dan like crew, right? And it goes not only like with these players, but there's ties to like the past. And I sort of look forward to learning more.
Very cool. Earth, Wind, and Fire. One more accolade to add to the pile. You've been validated by the four of us. So get excited.
You can throw that Lifetime Achievement Award in the trash because...
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Finally. Okay, all that remains...
Our verbal approval means everything.
It's on the record now. All that remains now is for us to crank up the old Albinator and figure out what we're going to be listening to next week in Tom's absence. He has given me the starter key, and I am now vigorously pumping gas into the engine and jerking the chain to get it started.
We need a visual of Rob trying to jumpstart the Albinator.
Without further ado, drum roll, please. Next week we will be listening to Big Stars. The record is called Number One Record. I like that already.
I've never heard of this, but
never heard of it.
I like the cut of your jib, if that's your album title.
I always wanted to call an album Greatest Hits. I thought that'd be fun. But this
What
is
year?
like that.
What year is that album?
That's a good question. Definitely 70s. I'm gonna guess mid 70s. I know them a little bit. They're kind of they're like an early indie 70s group, and I want to say that they did the original version of the song that is the theme of that 70s show, but I think the one you're hearing on that 70s show is a cover.
Ah, no shit.
Anyway, I think they're kind of like an underground band from the 70s. Cool. Well, we look forward to that. Hope you are excited to listen along to some more 70s pop music with Big Star, and we will be seeing you next week. If you think we got it right, if you think we got it wrong, if we got any of our facts incorrect about Earth, Wind, and Fire, please let us know. We came here to learn. We would love to be corrected via your emails to 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com. Please send your missive our way. And with that, we shall be closing out the week for 1001 Album Complaints. I've been Rob.
I'm Alan.
I'm Phil.
And I'm Justin.
Boosh.